This is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek. And one of the recent developments in the election in Japan has been the growth of a party called Reiwa, which was formed by Taro Yamamoto. And although it's a small party, it only has 5 members in the Japanese parliament, it has quite an interesting history, and it has the potential of growing into a much larger party in Japan. And we're with Louis Carlet, who's one of the co-founders of Tozen, which is a union in Japan of translators, of journalists and others, general union. And also with Kazumi Tori, who is a journalist and works with Workweek. So she'll be adding in when she thinks it's useful. So welcome to the show, Louis.
Good to be here.
So why don't we first start where Taro came from, because he is a kind of a Fukushima, a woke person. Out of the whole Fukushima nuclear disaster, that kind of woke him up. Why don't you talk about how he became active politically and his early history as an actor?
I don't know so many details. I think he came from Hyogo Prefecture, and he was a celebrity from the time he was in high school, and basically he was in a lot of comedy, and he did a lot of silly things on TV, and became famous as an actor comedian. And then with the March 11th, 2011 earthquake disaster, as I'm sure everyone knows, there was a subsequent disaster at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. And the government's response and their evasion of responsibility in that disaster and that triple meltdown really angered a lot of people around the country. They had to evacuate the area around the nuclear power plant, and the entire country went into really serious panic mode about what would happen. There was question about if the meltdown would get worse and endanger Tokyo itself. And so the government's reaction, as well as Tokyo Electric Power Company's reaction, or Tozen, really galvanized a lot of people to become active in the anti-nuclear power movement. And one of those was Yamamoto Taro, who, in effect, by becoming political, he gave up his career as an actor celebrity, and he turned himself into a politician after that point.
And he was basically blacklisted, so he wasn't able to get any work. Was that the case?
Yeah, I mean, there's a kind of in the entertainment industry in Japan, there's an understanding that you don't make political comments, or you keep them to a minimum. And he took a very strong anti-nuclear power position, which was in conflict with both the government and, of course, the corporate media. So that, and of course, the entertainment industry, which is also corporations. So, of course, that led to, in effect, nobody was willing to hire him after that. And I think he understood that. And I think he made the decision knowing what would happen. And he basically chose a second career. And since then, he's been a politician and an activist, and actually a really great thinker and speaker.
And he was elected initially with a vote of 600,000 from Tokyo. That's quite a large vote. Was that a reflection of the anger of people about what would happen at Fukushima?
Yeah, I think it really changed. Like I remember I was involved in many of the protests against nuclear power at the time. And our union, Tozen Union, also has an anti-nuclear power stance. I remember how it really became a serious popular movement. It's waned a little bit now, but at that time, basically everyone, most people were very strongly against nuclear power. And not only against nuclear power, but against the way it was being treated in the casualness, because there was all kinds of warnings before the disaster of Fukushima, and there were all kinds of sloppy inspections and broken rules and stuff like that. So it really politicized a big portion of the population. And I think his ability to break into the Diet really symbolized that new awareness around the country.
And of course, the structure of the Japanese laws, election laws, make it difficult for an individual candidate to survive as an independent. How was he able to survive?
Yeah, and I should say, it's true what you say, although nothing like in my country, the United States, where it's even more.
Winner takes all. There's no proportional representation.
And the system is so skewed to you have to be a large, basically a large corporation to even hope to get someone into the legislature. Well, I think of course the establishment was not happy with Yamamoto Taro, and not only that, even the opposition element of the establishment, and here I'm talking about the what was the Democratic Party of Japan and what's now the Constitutional Democratic Party. They've not been happy with him, and they see him as a threat. And their dream is a two-party system like the United States, which of course he threatens. And also he exposes a lot of their, that they in fact, in many ways are allied with corporate Japan. So it's incredible that he managed still to get into the Diet and bring others with him.
And he did some unusual things. He handed a letter to the emperor.
Yeah.
And the right wing went crazy over that. What was that incident about?
Yeah, well, that was related to the nuclear power issue. And I forget, he was receiving something from the emperor, and he with the other hand, he slipped him a letter about warning him about the dangers of nuclear power. And what a lot of people claimed was that he was violating the Constitution because the Constitution makes clear that the emperor is not supposed to be involved in politics, right? The emperor that, in effect, the U.S. wrote. And so they tried to twist it around that he was violating the principle of the Constitution. The first articles about the emperor. However, he rebutted that. If that's true, then the emperor should not be involved in the Olympics and inviting the Olympics to Japan, which the government did involve the emperor. So it's some double standard there.
So he has no problem challenging politically.
Yeah, he has no problem challenging
main parties.
And using theater to do it. And a lot of people criticize him for this, but I think it's great. I think it's wonderful that he uses theater and drama. And he's done that before in the Diet, where he went really slowly to vote against the motion. And I think it's great that he combines theater, which is his background, and politics. There's nothing wrong with theater. And if he can raise awareness with it, I don't see anything wrong with it. Some people say it cheapens politics, like politics should be this staid. And I think there's an element of elitism, that politics should be this staid domain of experts who understand it as a very serious business, and you don't want to do these political stunts. Although, they use all kinds of theater tricks in corporate advertising, in corporate media, corporate news. So again, a double standard.
And the Abe administration, previous administrations, there's a growing corruption, privatization scandals. That's not unique. It's happening in the United States as well. Has that put people off, or people angry about the politicians in Japan?
Yes. Now I'm going to say something that I think, this is not so much covered in the press. This is something from speaking with many, many Japanese, that many Japanese, I think most Japanese don't like the Liberal Democratic Party. They don't like Abe, which is really bizarre because the LDP wins the elections. And so what I get from a lot of Japanese people is that they hate all the parties. They hate the LDP, but they don't like the other opposition parties. And so they end up, for some reason, just going with whatever's there, and it ends up helping the LDP. So,
well, the opposition parties, are they really opposition? It seems like there was a split off from the LDP. Many of the, as far as capitalism, many of these parties have the same principles as the LDP, don't they?
Yeah, people forget that the Democratic Party split off from the LDP. These are LDP people. And it's true that even within the former LDP, there were some who were kind of liberal. And now in the Constitutional Democratic Party, I would say they're not an opposition, even though 2 or 3 of them are pretty decent. Again, very similar to the Democratic Party in the United States, where you might have your occasional Bernie Sanders or the squad, or at least what the squad used to be. But in general, there's pro-corporate, anti-worker. And these are not true opposition parties. The Constitutional Democratic Party clearly wants a 2-party system, just like the US, so that the elites don't have to deal with real opposition parties, like I would say the Communist Party of Japan and also Yamamoto Taro's Reiwa Shinsengumi is the name of the party, by the way. So.
And in the last election, there was, for the first time, disabled candidates who ran, and they got into office. And one of the characteristics of Taro Yamamoto and the way he campaigns is he has a slideshow or slides, 60,000 slides, and he actually answers questions when he speaks at campaign rallies. Talk about that whole phenomena and how unusual it is in Japanese politics and even American politics for that matter.
Yeah, well, I think this is his attempt to use theater to raise awareness and also to really get people more involved directly in the whole process. I think when you're talking about disabled, you're talking about one of the Diet members was an ALS patient.
That's correct.
And one of the reasons that the party at the time ran that candidate was because he noticed that the Diet building was not barrier free, that it was not disabled friendly. And so by having a patient with ALS become a Diet member, it kind of forced changes onto the Diet building, which is a symbol for the rest of the country. He was trying to push this inclusive agenda to get more awareness that everything in the country has to be more inclusive, and that his inclusivity really focuses on that. Look, the citizens are the ones who should be running policy. It's their answers that he wants to answer directly, unlike most politicians. And to me, that's a great trend.
And the whole issue of his education that he does in his campaigns. Why don't you talk about that? Because it is reported he has like 60,000 slides. When people ask questions, he has it in his mind where to go to get these slides to educate. I mean, as far as education, it sounds like he's using these slides as a vehicle for education of the public.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something in Tozen Union we also like to do. It's rather than just like, let's say you have some experts telling you what you should do or shouldn't do, or what we as a society should do or not do. It's important to get people to understand what's going on, understand how the government works, understand how laws work. And his slideshows really helps to visualize for people and helps them, gives them the resources to find out on their own how things work. Because, the establishment, they gain a lot by things being complicated and obscure and hard to find. So, if you don't research stuff, you have no idea what's going on. And it's easy to get to not understand what's really happening when you hear a news story, especially when it's presented with a corporate perspective. And so his idea is, look, I'm not going to just tell you what the truth is, or I'm not going to just tell you my perspective. I'm going to give you the resources to actually find out for yourself, and then you make the decision on yourself, on your own. So that's something, again, I think is great about his, his activism.
And he did not get elected in the last election. Why don't you talk about his program? I mean, what does he stand for? What is his party, Reiwa? How was this party formed, and why is it called Reiwa?
Okay. So first of all, I don't know. The Reiwa is the era Reiwa. It's the imperial era, the current imperial era, and he's actually gotten criticized by some on the left for using an imperial era name. The Shinsengumi, I think it had something to do with some group in high school. I'm sorry, I don't know the details about that. It was some group when he was really young, or I'm sorry, I don't know the details about it. His program, a lot of it is, well, first of all, recently a big thing is getting rid of the consumption tax. In 1989, Japan instituted.
Before we go on, there's some noise in the background. Is it possible?
Oh, you guys can you a little bit? I'm sorry. His main policy recently is getting rid of the consumption tax. In 1989, the government instituted a consumption tax. I think at the time it was 3% or 5%, and it's been going up ever since. And now it's at 10%. And the way he sees it, that's clearly a redistribution of wealth from ordinary people to the rich, because it doesn't affect, rich people's disposable income like it does for normal people. I mean, it's clearly an attack on poor and middle-class people. So his main program recently, a lot of it focuses on getting rid of the consumption tax. And he's been criticized a lot by saying, well, where are you going to get the money? And of course, for him, it's, you know, you can raise corporate tax, you can raise tax on high-income people. Of course, he's anti-nuclear. I looked at some of the things that he stood for just to remind myself. He's anti-nuclear power. He wants to make all school free and get rid of school debt, school loan debt, or student loan debt. So those are really very important policies of his. He, like, one thing I like about him is he really makes economics easy to understand. I've watched a lot of his speeches and videos, and he really gets to the core of what's really happening. Again, the establishment doesn't want us to understand easily, so they want to make it sound really complicated, and he makes it simple like it actually is. And so that's one thing I think is really important.
So he says, apparently he says he wants for people to feel that they're protected, that they don't have to worry about their future. A lot of Japanese now are worried about their future, like Americans, like people all over the world.
Yeah, so he supports a better welfare system, a more livable welfare, and he supports the fight for 15, although in Japan that comes out as about 1,500 yen an hour as a minimum wage. So that ties in with what you just said.
And he has run with other people. Who are the people that he runs with in the last election?
Yeah, there's a lot of conflict about that because he's always open to an alliance with opposition parties, including the Constitutional Democratic Party and including the Communist Party. And they have been, at least the Constitutional Democratic Party has been, for the main part, very opposed to that. And he's had a lot of trouble. In fact, they blame him when the Constitutional Party doesn't win. I don't know the detail of the last, because there's the elections for the lower house and also elections for Tokyo. So I'm not exactly detailed. Sorry, I forgot for a second the details of which party he actually ended up aligning with. But I know there's a lot of people on the left, so-called left, attack him for, you know, it's the old spoiler argument. You know, Bernie Sanders, caused, or Ralph Nader caused Bush to win. Bernie Sanders caused Trump to win, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. So he gets the very same argument against him.
And it seems that people that attend his rallies, he's on the campaign trail. It sounds like every day of the month. I mean, how is he able to travel around the country and speak, you know, sometimes 2-3 times a day and keep this up?
I'm not, well, he's younger than I am, and he looks pretty healthy, so I guess he's got a lot of energy. And I mean, I think he enjoys it. You know, it's really nice to see him speak in person. He's really passionate. He makes things so clear. It's not, he doesn't take an elitist attitude. He really talks to people like people and clear cut. So maybe because he enjoys it, I envy him, his energy. So.
Well, even right wingers challenge him. He gets in debates.
Yeah. He's not afraid of debates. He'll go on TV and talk to anybody. So I saw a recent debate with him about the consumption tax, and they were saying, you know, you don't tell people when you say getting rid of the consumption tax that you're going to have to raise taxes on middle class, which is not true. And he says, you know, don't misrepresent what I say. So I think for those who like him, like we really like him, right? And I think a lot of it is that he really challenges the establishment, and people really hate the establishment. That's my take.
And the structure in Japan, I mean, you have even after the pandemic, people still voted for the Liberal Democratic Party. How do you explain that? Because it's been a catastrophe for Japan. The rollout of the vaccines was a disaster. The Olympics lost money. Abe had thought that the Olympics were going to be great for him for re-election. It seems like all their policies have backfired. They still are restarting the nuclear plants. The living conditions of workers have declined. and yet the LDP was able to hold on to power.
I think people don't support the LDP. They vote for them, but they don't really support them or their policies. I think a lot of it is just they don't know enough about the other parties, and they're just, it's just fear, because the media, of course, fear mongers, and I think that's part of it. I mean, I can't say it for sure that that's why, but I do know very few people like actually support the Democratic, the LDP.
And the program of Reiwa is pretty radical. I looked at their labor program for workers, pay, work conditions, health and safety. He's also against the Hanako base in Okinawa. He's against militarization. He's against the encirclement of China.
And fight for 15, yes.
Yeah, I mean, he's got positions which are contrary, very much contrary to the position of Japanese capitalism and American capitalism. Do you think that has he been accused of being a communist, or what do the critics of him say about him?
I mean, communist in Japan is a different meaning. Like, a lot of people hate the Communist Party, and that, I think if people call him a communist, that would confuse it with that. What I hear more criticism of him from the so-called left, like from the Constitutional Democratic Party and a lot of so-called liberals. So that he's messing things up, or just getting attention or something like that. So, and I don't know why that the LDP can still manage to eke out a victory, but they do. And what's more concerning is that as Kazumi-san said, the Ishin no Kai is gaining seats in the Diet, and that's like centered around Osaka. And that's a very, dangerous right-wing party. And that's also touches upon like a lot of disaffection with the establishment. Although I think ultimately they are establishment. So. And
one of the goals of Abe is to change the Constitution. Why don't you explain what they want to do with the change of the Constitution, what the plan is of the capitalist parties in Japan, the right-wing capitalist parties, to change the Constitution? What does that mean?
Well, the main thing that's been on the agenda for a long time is to change it to make a military, like the current self-defense forces, which is Japan's military. It's not called the military, but it is military by any definition. They want to make it more openly acceptable. They want to clearly make overseas war possible. Basically, they want to make the Constitution allow them to have a military like any other country. That's one of the main things. Another thing is that you hear from the right-wing corporate media a lot is that the Constitution has lots of rights of citizens, but it doesn't have enough duties of citizens. And so there's this, authoritarian impulse to, force the citizens not just to have rights, but to have duties that they have to uphold and, protect Japan's national identity. And there's not so much support about the war making, but there is more support for this kind of like, this right-wing, this nationalistic push, especially with the fear-mongering about China always in the media. So, and there are going to be elections of the upper house. You think that the Renwa is going to grow and become even larger than it is? I mean, I think it's up to us. So, I think nothing's set in stone, and, as organizers, it's up to us to make sure that they do, or that, or the other parties that represent workers, can make progress. So. And the situation in Japan now is that workers are becoming unhappy about the pandemic, how they've been treated. And your union has had some major growth. Why don't you talk about the situation of your own union with your members and why your union is growing massively at this point? Yeah, well, Tozen Union increased its size after the pandemic. I think a lot of things is that a lot of workers who knew about the union, but not so much, and they may have been putting off joining, the pandemic kind of spurred them to take action and actually join and go through the procedures. The pandemic really, I think, made jobs insecure, made people insecure about their future. All of a sudden, everything was thrown into question. It also raised questions of telework. Some people wanted to do telework, some people didn't. So different workplaces had different demands about that. another thing is that for 2 months, everything was shut down so that companies were supposed to pay 60% of wages, but they didn't all. And so a lot of workers were fighting for either 60% or 100%. And so many issues came up. And so suddenly we had more local unions, we had more members, and we kind of had to deal with this huge influx of labor consultations.
And what is happening with the major unions, Rengo and those unions?
Yeah, well, we're technically a part of Rengo, which is like the largest national center in Japan. I don't see any real strong growth there. They're very conservative. They're close to being pro-management. They openly take a policy of conciliation with management. And so at the time, I don't think people care much about Rengo, and they've drifted further and further towards the corporate interests. And so I don't expect much from them.
Well, the labor management partnership is not unique. The Afl-Cio believes in working with the bosses and actually taking money from the U.S. government for its international operations. So I would say, and what has been the role of the Afl-Cio in Japan?
Not a big role, to be honest. I know that at Rengo and other unions, actually, Rengo sends out, they meet with Afl-Cio once in a while. Either Afl-Cio people come here or they go to the United States. It's more like just kind of like a friendly relationship. It's not, I don't see much actual alliance or working together on something specific as far as I know. Maybe I just don't know about it. But and just like in the Afl-Cio, there are unions that represent workers in Rengo, including Tozen Union. There are some unions that are really active and really fight for their workers. So.
And the United States occupied Japan after the end of the Second World War, and it was involved in writing the Constitution of Japan. And also, it supported the Liberal Democratic Party. The CIA provided funding. Why don't you talk about the political formation post-war Japan and the role of the Afl-Cio and the CIA in Japan?
I mean, after World War II, there was such a disgust with the military government and even with capitalism. And the communists were very popular after the war, and the labor movement was very strong. At the beginning, the US, they wanted to destroy the zaibatsu, which are like these big, huge conglomerates. And they wanted to really, kind of bust them up and institute like an American style version of capitalism. And at first that went well. And the US in effect wrote the Constitution and pushed a lot of the laws, including trade union law, labor standards law. And this freed up a lot of left-wingers, including the Communist Party. Many members of the Communist Party have been tortured very horribly during the war. And after the war, they were finally free. After the war, the communist movement was very strong in Japan, the Marxist movement, socialist movement, and the unions were stronger and stronger until the US felt it was losing control. And so they did what was called the reverse course. And the reverse course was basically a rolling back this movement and starting to clamp down on, I guess, what they considered excessive unionism and excessive strikes and left-wingism. And the U.S. made sure that the Liberal Democratic Party would win. This is very similar to what the U.S. did in Italy, France, and other countries, where the U.S. allied with the former Japanese militarists, and they made sure that the Liberal Democratic Party got into power. And so this is a real big challenge to the notion that Japan is democratic, and the notion that in 1951, sovereignty was returned to Japan. Now, personally, I don't think Japan has had sovereignty. As long as you have foreign military bases all over your country, it's hard to say that you can even have a democratic election. And the Japanese never chose these bases. They never elected to have foreign military bases in their country. They were forced on them. And the LDP has stayed in power almost the entire time since they first got elected. So,
and even the airspace even in the airspace in Tokyo, is controlled by the U.S. military. I mean, it seems they promised not to bring in nuclear weapons to the United States, but the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty, later people found out that they did bring in nuclear weapons to ports in Japan, and that treaty is going to be renegotiated. What do people in Japan feel about this U.S.-Japan military treaty?
I mean, what I get a sense of, like, not politically minded Japanese, but ordinary Japanese, is they don't really believe the hype, but they also don't like if I say to a Japanese person, ordinary Japanese person, if I say to an ordinary Japanese person that it's obvious that the U.S. is a hegemon and Japan is just following orders, right? Japanese know that, but they don't say it, and you're not supposed to say it out loud. It's supposed to be just kind of understood. And so there's kind of a sense that it'd be dangerous to go against the United States, or it'd be dangerous to ask the U.S. military to leave. And that they wouldn't leave anyway. So there's a sense among many Japanese that we can't even talk about it. Like, it's just so ridiculous that don't even talk about it. But I don't hear any Japanese saying, "Oh, I'm so glad the Americans are here to," except for ideologues or media. I never hear that, "Oh, they're protecting us." You know what I mean? They're protecting us from the Chinese or the North Koreans. It's only like right wingers or something like that.
The issue of nuclear power still is an issue. The melted reactors, the radioactive contamination continues. The Japanese government is planning to dump over 1 million tons of radioactive tritium water into the Pacific Ocean. And the history of introduction of nuclear power plants to Japan was facilitated by U.S. Putting back war criminals even into positions of power, taking over the TV stations and telling the people of Japan through General Electric and Ronald Reagan that this was peace atoms and it was harmless.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, Atoms for Peace goes back to Eisenhower, I think. And one of the things I think has become clear is that a lot of the reasons that Japan supports nuclear power is not just because they care about Tokyo Electric's corporate earnings or something like that. A lot of it has to do with because the technology for nuclear power and nuclear weapons is very similar. And to maintain the technology necessary for making nuclear weapons, it's important to have nuclear power, especially like Japan that doesn't make nuclear weapons. It's important to maintain the technology to be able to do so. And so I think nuclear power gives them that opportunity. And of course, they don't care so much about the effect on the environment or the people that, get affected by it or by meltdowns, etc. like that. So that's how I see it. And of course, the U.S. pressure on Japan.
And the issue of immigration in Japan, it's a very, for some, rigid culture. I mean, on an island, people having the same history, same culture, and yet the population decline is massive in Japan, that they can't fill jobs. And that is the case in the United States as well, but even more so in Japan, the aging population in Japan, it seems like this is creating a crisis and forcing them actually to change their policies on immigration.
Yeah. First of all, Japan is often called a small island. It's not. I mean, it's neither small nor an island. It's an archipelago, and it's the 6th largest island nation in the world. Also, island has no meaning in an era of air travel. Nobody comes to Japan by boat. There's no difference in that sense between Japan and Canada. So I think those are something we can just dismiss outright. Now, it's true that the population is declining and the labor force is declining. However, what I've been saying a long time, and this is something even Bernie Sanders is now saying, is that there's no such thing as a labor shortage in a market economy. What a labor shortage, what you have to translate that to is management is unwilling to pay the market rate for labor. If they want a market economy, they got to pay the market rate, and they don't want to. But if they bring in foreigners, they realize they can pay a lot less. First of all, because they bring in foreigners from poor countries who have lower expectations, and also because they are put in a position of great insecurity and much more difficult for them to demand higher conditions. So you have so you have like Keidanren, the major business federation in Japan, and the government actually pushing to bring foreigners over, but in very restricted and insecure conditions so that they can keep wages really down.
And the program of Reiwa is the equal pay for equal work and
Reiwa Shinsengumi, ne? Yeah.
against xenophobia and attack on immigrants. There is a rising attack on Korean, Japanese. What is the developments of the right wing and also growing militarism, even some among young people in Japan?
Yeah, against Korean and Chinese. Well, there's two things. First of all, I think a lot of it has to do with Japan's war atrocities against and colonialization of Korea and China before and during World War II. And I think a lot of it goes back to that era where a lot of right-wingers in Japan are not willing to really come to terms with what Japan did to these countries. And instead, you resent your, you know how people can sometimes turn guilt into anger or resent their victims. And so I think the right wing, who identify with Japan as a great nation state, they resent the reminder that Japan did these horrible things in Korea and China. And so there's a lot of resentment against Koreans in China, especially among the right wing, but even the government establishment, there's like an underlying sense of antagonism towards the country of China and the country of North Korea, and even to some degree, South Korea. And so this is a really serious thing. There's a thing that right-wingers often say, that the Koreans in Japan have a special privilege, like tokken, like Korean privilege is like a thing. It's ridiculous and it doesn't really exist. If anything, they are have less privilege than Japanese. But there's a sense of, like, many right-wingers believe that.
And there were even followers of Trump and cults in the United States. They were marching in Tokyo.
Yeah, JAnon. Yeah, JAnon, which of course comes from QAnon. Yeah, there's right-wingers. Yeah, there's right-wingers in Japan who believe in the plandemic. They believe, I mean, some of the things they believe are right. They believe that, big pharma only cares about profits, which is totally true. But they also believe that Trump is the savior and that he's going to save us from this, and that the whole thing is blown out of proportion, that there's no, serious pandemic. Yeah, it's really amazing to see so many Japanese go into these conspiracy theories that are pro-Trump, of all people, right?
And are you optimistic about the future for working people in Japan? I mean, beyond Reiwa, it seems that people are looking for some change or about the future.
Well, I personally try to avoid optimism or pessimism, because I think it encourages, at least in me, it encourages passivity. So I think if there's no, like, I don't believe in hope. Like, it's up to me or it's not going to happen. So, like, we will do it or we won't do it. You know what I mean? That's how I try to see it. And I think that's maybe a more effective way, as an activist. So I don't like to say I'm optimistic, or pessimistic.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you very much for joining us. We've been talking with Louis Carlet. He is the co-founder of Tozen, a general union and a large number of translators in Japan. So thanks for joining us on Work Week.
Thank you very much.